Over the weekend, the pound has tanked because of the news that Kwasi Kwarteng is going to add to his fiscal package on Friday with even more tax cuts. Now, you have called it casino economics, but what if Kwasi Kwarteng's gamble pays off and we all feel pretty good by 2024?
Well, we saw on Friday the markets begin to react to what the Chancellor set out in his statement, a series of unfunded tax cuts, primarily for the richest in society. And that has put pressure on sterling, not just against the dollar, but also against the euro. And that has consequences in the real world, because it will push up inflation further. It pushes up the costs of government borrowing, and in turn, it will mean higher borrowing costs for families and for businesses as well. So at the moment we've got a situation where the Bank of England is got its foot on the brake, and the Chancellor's got his foot on the accelerator.
So should the Bank of England be intervening?
That is a road to ruin.
To save the pound? Should Andrew Bailey step in?
Well, look, I was an economist at the Bank of England for many years before I became Member of Parliament, and I respect the operational independence of the bank. But the bank has a clear mandate to control inflation, and they will see the impact that is happening now on sterling and the impact that that will have in turn on inflation. And so there will be further pressure on the bank to increase interest rates. And as I say, that means higher borrowing costs for families and higher borrowing costs for businesses, which is why I fear that for all the talk from the Chancellor last Friday, this is not a plan for growth, because if families have got less money to spend because they're spending more on mortgage interest payments, and if businesses are put off investment because of the cost of borrowing going up, we're not going to get the growth. Trickle-down economics is not going to work. It hasn't worked in the past, and this is just putting further pressure on inflation and interest rates.
So should Kwasi Kwarteng step in to save the pound?
Well, Kwasi Kwarteng at the weekend fuelled this sell-off of the pound by doubling down on his package on Friday and suggesting that there is more to come. That is not what financial markets want to hear. They want to hear that the Chancellor has got a serious plan for getting a grip of the public finances. We didn't hear that on Friday. We didn't hear it over the weekend. And now we have that reaction in global financial markets to the irresponsible and reckless statement that we had from the Chancellor on Friday and the comments through the course of the weekend.
So what financial markets and business want is credibility, stability. This is your chance to present yourself as a government in waiting. But isn't the advantage of the Tory package that at least it's clear?
Well, I set out Labour's fiscal rules a year ago, that we would pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts, that we would get our debt down as a share of GDP, that, of course, in difficult times, some borrowing, responsible borrowing, might be necessary, but then subject to that, we would invest in the industries and the opportunities of the future. And that's what the National Wealth Fund that I'll be setting out at conference today is all about, because there is a global race going on at the moment for the jobs and industries of the future. Britain risks falling behind in that race, whilst other governments support their businesses to get the jobs, to get the factories to their countries. But we're not doing that. My plans that I'll be setting out today would do exactly that, a serious plan for climate, for growth and for levelling up.
And over the weekend, Keir Starmer said that he would reverse this cut to the top rate, but he would keep the cut to the basic rate of income tax, along with all the spending that you would do on public services. How would you afford all of that without adding to borrowing?
Well, I've been very clear, Lizzie, as I say, that we would fund day-to-day spending through tax receipts. And that means difficult decisions, but that is the honest way and the responsible way to manage our public finances, and will give us the room to invest in those industries and jobs of the future through our National Wealth Fund.
Now, the backdrop to this conference, of course, is the strike at the Port of Liverpool. Workers aren't happy because they aren't getting pay rises in line with inflation. Your Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, has said that she would repeal all the government's anti-worker legislation. Would you agree with that, or do you admit that your party hasn't made its mind up on how it handles strikes and unions?
Well, I totally understand why working people are taking industrial action to protect their pay and to protect their jobs. That's why we need to get a grip of inflation. Now, the best thing that Labour politicians can do to get a fair deal for workers is to get a Labour government, and that's why I'll be setting out our plans to do exactly that in our conference today. But look, the government are having a bonfire of workers' rights. They are undermining workers' rights, and I'm not surprised that there is this industrial action. We didn't have this sort of industrial action last time we had a Labour government, because the last Labour government respected working people, respected the trade unions that represented them. That's a very different approach from what we see under this Tory government today.
But the flip side of all of this strike action is, of course, disruption. The whole point of strikes, arguably, this is the worst time to be having it. We need to have economic growth. The supply chain disruption could add to inflation. Shouldn't you get tougher on the unions? Would you get tougher on the unions like Liz Truss?
Well, what is Liz Truss doing? She is fueling the flames of this dispute and adding to the problems. We want workers at work. Workers want to be at work earning a wage. But the government's lack of respect for working people is driving them to this industrial action. We didn't have this sort of industrial unrest when Labour was last in government because we showed respect towards working people. We need to get a grip of inflation. The government's package on Friday did the exact opposite, pushing up inflation rather than trying to get it under control. Workers want a pay rise because they're seeing their wages failing to keep up with the rising cost of living. That is why we must deal with inflation to help protect the living standards of ordinary working people around our country.
So you say that they want a pay rise in line with inflation. Would you give that to public sector workers?
Well, look, we need to grow the economy, but we've got to get a grip of inflation. The reason why there are pay demands at such high levels is because inflation is at a 40-year high. So the most important thing is that we have a serious plan to grow the economy and a serious plan to get a grip of inflation. We don't have either of those from the government, and that is why people are so unhappy with the direction we're going in.